Chicago's Italian beef sandwich is a mess of contradictions. It's a working man's meal built with beef, yet it became iconic at a time when meat was out of reach for many. It's an American street food, but born from the traditions of Italian immigrants. The bread is French. The peppers are Mediterranean. The star is beef so thin you can see the grain. How did this improbable mixture become a symbol of Chicago? Here's the strange part. The Italian beef sandwich doesn't trace to a chef or a restaurant mogul, but to families trying to make do with less. Behind every juicy bite is a story of thrift and hardship, a product of the Great Depression, when Chicago, like the rest of the nation, was gripped by unemployment and uncertainty. A thick crust of hardship wrapped around the city, and yet, from within those limits, a new ritual began taking shape. Thin sliced beef, dunked in savory juices, piled onto bread, then buried in peppers, sometimes dipped, sometimes bare. One thing is certain. The Italian beef sandwich could only have happened here, in Chicago, at this moment in history. But why? And what? Of all the cities in America, made Chicago the place where beef, hardship, and immigrant creativity collided and stuck? The answer isn't just in the sandwich. It's in the stockyards, the railroads, and the unlikely power of surviving together. Chicago sits between two giants, Lake Michigan, all cold steel-gray water, and the boundless patchwork of the Midwest's farmland. Its place on the map was destiny. From its earliest days, Chicago was a crossing, a channel between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. By the mid-19th century, the Illinois and Michigan Canal and spiraling networks of railroads made Chicago the switchyard of a continent. The stockyards themselves were a railroad invention. 9 rail companies pooled $100,000 in 1864 to buy a stretch of marshland on the south side and centralize the livestock trade. Raw goods from the entire hinterland flowed through the city. Finished products, people, and ideas poured out. When the Union stockyards opened in 1865, they transformed Chicago into the nerve center of the American meatpacking industry. Farmers from Iowa and Wyoming sent cattle and hogs by rail to Chicago's slaughterhouses, knowing the city could pay and process like no other. After refrigerated rail cars arrived in 1881, Chicago could ship dressed beef to every corner of the country. The waste ran so thick into a fork of the Chicago River that the water bubbled with gas. Locals named it Bubbly Creek. Back of the yards, the immigrant neighborhood around the stockyards grew alongside them, a place defined by work and the dense smell of cooking meat, day and night. Meatpacking was grueling, hazardous labor. Danger and injury were part of the bargain. Workers, many of them immigrants, bore the brunt, often with little recourse. Yet the constant churn of labor and livestock meant beef was everywhere, even for those at the bottom rung. Over time, a local way of using every scrap evolved. Cuts that might be overlooked elsewhere, shank, round, brisket, became central in Chicago because they had to be. Standing in a Chicago market, you could see it all. Giant barrels of peppers, crusty loaves delivered by the dozen, and beef displayed not as luxury, but necessity. But geography only explains the sandwich's ingredients, not its story. For that, you have to follow the people who called Chicago home. To understand Italian beef, you have to trace Chicago's story of migration. The city was built by waves. First the French fur traders, then Germans, Irish, Scandinavians, Poles, Russians, and finally Italians, each group layering its traditions atop the last. By the early 20th century, Chicago's population had soared to over 1 million, much of it immigrant. The railroads and factories called out to those seeking work. Between 1880 and 1914, a flood of Italian families arrived from Calabria, Sicily, and Tuscany, settling in neighborhoods named for their origins: Taylor Street, Belmont Cragen, Pullman. They brought Catholic festivals, new languages, and a hunger for opportunity. Yet their arrival was marked by hardship, discrimination, and the challenge of starting over in a coldly pragmatic, sometimes hostile city. By the 1920s, Chicago's Italian-American community was the country's third largest. Many new arrivals became merchants and restaurateurs, or worked fruit stalls and construction sites. But when the bottom fell out in 1929, the dream turned survivalist. The Great Depression, with its breadlines, Hoovervilles, and unemployment that soared to 25%, hit Chicago's working class especially hard. Tough cuts of beef, considered too stringy or coarse, were all the average family could afford, if they could afford meat at all. And here, the story sharpens. It's widely believed that Italian beef was born in church basements and family gatherings where hospitality outpaced resources. The secret? Slicing beef so thin, a single roast could stretch across dozens of sandwiches. Stories credit figures like Pasquale Scala or Tony Ferreri as possible inventors, but nobody holds the definitive recipe. The practice of dunking the sandwich in savory juzz, a trick to both add flavor and mask dryness, became the calling card. And here's a detail you won't find elsewhere. The Union stockyards were so dominant they attracted not just workers, but curious celebrities. Rudyard Kipling and Sarah Bernhardt both visited the stockyards, bearing witness to the whirlwind of industry and labor that defined Chicago. For primary evidence, the receipt, consider one written account. One possible origin is that the sandwich was invented by Italian-American immigrants who sliced inexpensive beef cuts exceedingly thin to feed many people and to tenderize tougher cuts of beef that they were limited to buying due to discrimination. But stretching beef was only one solution to a city in crisis. The next chapter is about supply chains, side hustles, and how the price of beef, once rock bottom, could shape a restaurant empire. To understand why beef was available for so many, you have to walk the lines of supply and demand that snaked through the city. By 1890, 9 million animals were processed every year, and by 1921, the stockyards employed 40,000 people and produced 82% of the meat Americans ate at home. The mechanized packing lines pioneered at Armour's plant in 1867 ran so efficiently they later inspired the automobile assembly line. The glut meant even tough, less desirable cuts were plentiful and relatively cheap. But then came the crash. The Wall Street collapse of 1929 slammed every sector, but for Chicago, it upended a food economy built on abundance. Unemployment surged to 25% in the city. Families who once relied on steady work found themselves hunting for scraps and making every bite count. Prices for basic foodstuffs fell, but so did income. Corn that sold for $1.43 a bushel in 1929 fetched 31 cents by 1932. This forced adaptation. Local restaurants and church halls began serving these sandwiches at social gatherings, weddings, and fundraisers, meals that could feed many for little. Entrepreneurs recognized the opportunity. Small Italian delis and beef stands appeared, often run by families pooling resources. Commercial sales of the sandwich began around 1938. By the Chicago Tribune's account, it stayed a neighborhood specialty through the 1950s and 60s, then took off in the 1970s, and by the 1980s, Italian beef was everywhere across Chicago. But how does an improvised meal become a city's icon? The legacy story comes next. Walk into any Chicago beef stand today, and you'll see how a sandwich born of hardship became a badge of belonging. Should it be wet or dry? Should the peppers be sweet or fiery giardiniera. Each corner shop has its loyalists, each family its own tradition. By the late 20th century, Italian beef had spread beyond Italian neighborhoods. In the 1970s and 1980s, it moved from local stands to citywide staple. It appeared in union halls, sporting events, even celebrity menus. Neil Diamond and Jay Leno were known to order it, and in the 2020s, the television series The Bear exploded its popularity across America. The rituals around ordering dipped, dunked, or wet, specifying peppers or no peppers, became code words, signals that you belonged. The Union stockyards themselves closed on July 30th, 1971, after 106 years of operation. But the sandwich they made possible outlived them. The answer to why Italian beef happened here, of all places, lies not in a single inventor or a recipe, but in the layered, stubborn spirit of Chicago. So why did a sandwich about making do become Chicago's most beloved meal? The answer is simple, and it's written in every bite: history. Italian beef sandwiches are more than food. They are evidence, receipts left behind by families who bent hardship into possibility, who turned tough cuts into celebration. The flavors aren't subtle, and neither is the origin. With each sandwich wrapped in butcher paper, Chicago remembers how it survived together, when every job, every meal, every cent counted. That's why the disputes about wet versus dry or hot versus sweet matter. They're debates about memory, not just taste. Italian beef isn't just Chicago's iconic sandwich because of how it tastes. It's because of what it stands for: a story of adaptation, grit, and unconventional ingenuity that, against all odds, never lost its particular Chicago flavor.